I still remember the summer evenings on Maple Street, when the whole neighborhood would gather on porches with cold lemonade and easy laughter. That's when I first noticed them, Marcus and Diane Fletcher, the couple in the blue colonial house 2 doors down. Marcus was quiet, gentle, always offering to help with groceries or fix a broken fence. Diane was different, loud, sharp-tongued, her laughter often cutting through the warm air like glass. I was 40 then, recently divorced, finding my footing again in this quiet Connecticut suburb where everyone knew everyone's business. It started small, the way cruelty always does. A comment here, a dismissive wave there. Diane rolling her eyes when Marcus spoke at the neighborhood barbecue. Oh, Marcus wouldn't know about that, he barely finished community college. She'd say, "Tss," her voice dripping with mock sweetness while the other wives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marcus would smile tightly, his weathered hands gripping his beer bottle a little harder, the light in his brown eyes dimming just slightly. I watched from my lawn chair, my stomach twisting with recognition. I'd heard those tones before in my own failed marriage. The worst incident happened at the Johnsons' 4th of July party 3 years into my time on Maple Street. The whole neighborhood was there, kids running through sprinklers, the smell of burgers on the grill mixing with freshly cut grass. Marcus had just finished telling a story about his job as a maintenance supervisor at the local high school. Pride evident in his voice as he described fixing the auditorium's ancient heating system. Diane actually laughed and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "A janitor with delusions of grandeur. How adorable." The conversations around us died instantly. Marcus's face went pale, then red, his hands trembling as he set down his plate. He didn't say a word, just walked away, toward the back fence where the shadows were longer and no one could see his face. I followed him without thinking, found him leaning against an oak tree, his shoulders shaking silently. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he whispered, his voice breaking, and I realized this wasn't new. This was a pattern worn smooth by repetition. I touched his arm gently and said, "You deserve better than this." He looked at me with eyes full of quiet defeat and replied, "After 15 years, you start to believe what you're told." After that night, I couldn't unsee it, the way Diane controlled every conversation, every decision, every moment of their public life. She'd correct him in front of neighbors, finish his sentences with dramatic sighs, introduce him as just my husband with a dismissive wave. Marcus began to shrink, his posture curving inward, his voice getting softer until it was almost a whisper. The other neighbors noticed, but did nothing. What could we say? It was their marriage, their private hell made public. I started avoiding neighborhood gatherings, the secondhand humiliation too painful to witness. Then, without warning, they were gone. One morning I woke to find a for sale sign on their lawn, and within a month, the blue colonial was empty. I heard through Mrs. Patterson next door that Marcus had finally filed for divorce, that he'd taken a new job in another state, starting over at 45 with nothing but his dignity in a suitcase. Diane had fought it viciously, I heard, but eventually moved to Boston for some corporate position. Maple Street felt quieter after that, like the neighborhood had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. 10 years passed, like water under a bridge. I changed too, went back to school, earned my business degree, climbed from administrative assistant to operations manager. My hair turned silver at the temples. My confidence grew firmer with each year, each challenge overcome. I moved to Hartford for a better position, left Maple Street and its memories behind in a rearview mirror. I thought about Marcus sometimes, wondering if he'd found peace, if he'd rebuilt himself the way I had rebuilt myself, brick by quiet brick. Last Monday, I started my new job as Director of Facilities Management at Riverside Corporate Plaza, a gleaming glass tower in downtown Hartford. The building hummed with efficient energy, hundreds of employees moving through marble lobbies and steel-framed offices. I was nervous, excited, carrying my leather portfolio like a shield as I rode the elevator to the executive floor for orientation. The HR director, a kind woman named Sharon, walked me through protocols and introduced me to department heads, each handshake bringing me closer to this new chapter of my life. "And now, let me introduce you to our Vice President of Operations," Sharon said, leading me toward a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Connecticut River. My breath caught the name on the door, read Marcus Fletcher. My heart hammered as the door opened, and there he stood, but transformed. Gone was the hunched, defeated man from Maple Street. This Marcus stood tall, shoulders back, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. His silver-streaked hair cut sharp and professional, confidence radiating from him like light. His eyes met mine and widened with recognition, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Is it really you?" he asked, his voice warm and strong. Nothing like the whisper I remembered. We stood there for a moment, the years collapsing between us. And then he pulled me into a brief professional hug. I can't believe it. After all these years, Sharon looked confused but pleased by our obvious connection. You two know each other. Marcus laughed, real laugh, full and genuine. She was the only person on Maple Street who saw me as human. We didn't have time to talk, then both of us had full schedules, meetings stacked back to back in those first crucial days. But I watched him throughout that week, saw how people respected him, how his decisions carried weight, how he commanded rooms without raising his voice. He'd rebuilt himself completely, transformed from janitor to executive through night classes, certifications, relentless determination. During a department meeting, I heard his assistant mention he'd completed his MBA while working full-time, had revolutionized facilities management at 3 previous companies, was being headhunted by firms across the Northeast. On Friday afternoon, Marcus stopped by my office with coffee. He remembered I took it black with 1 sugar. We talked for an hour about the decade between then and now, the long roads we'd both traveled. He told me about the divorce, the darkness that followed, the moment he decided to stop being the person Diane had made him believe he was. I realized she was wrong, he said quietly, looking out at the city skyline. I wasn't worthless. I wasn't stupid. I was just trapped in someone else's story of who I was supposed to be. The following Tuesday changed everything. I was in a meeting with Marcus and the executive team, discussing a major renovation project for the building's infrastructure. The conference room was all polished wood and leather chairs, the kind of space that smelled like success and expensive coffee. We were deep into budget projections when the door opened and Sharon entered with a new hire, introducing her to the room. Everyone, this is Diane Morrison, our new senior compliance officer. My blood ran cold. Marcus's pen stopped mid-signature. There she was, older, her blonde hair now professionally highlighted to hide the gray, wearing a designer suit that screamed expensive desperation. Her eyes scanned the room with that familiar, calculating look, landing on each face, assessing, judging. When her gaze reached Marcus, she froze completely, her practiced smile cracking like old paint. She didn't recognize him at first. How could she? This wasn't the broken man she'd discarded. This was someone entirely new, someone powerful, someone she'd have to answer to. Sharon, oblivious to the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm, continued cheerfully. Diane, this is our VP of Operations, Mr. Fletcher. You'll be working closely with his department on regulatory compliance for the renovation project. The word Mr. hung in the air. Diane's face went through a spectrum of emotions, confusion, recognition, shock, horror. Her hand trembled slightly as she extended it toward Marcus, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Fletcher, sir, it's a pleasure. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Marcus remained perfectly professional, his handshake firm but brief, his expression neutral and unreadable. Welcome to Riverside, Miss Morrison. I look forward to a productive working relationship. His voice was calm, controlled, holding none of the emotion I knew must be churning beneath that composed surface. Diane stood there, clearly trying to process this impossible reversal. This man she'd called a janitor with delusions now, sitting at the head of the table, holding her career advancement in his capable hands. I watched her swallow hard, watched her force her face into professional pleasantness. The meeting continued, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Every time Diane needed to address Marcus, she stumbled over Sir or Mr. Fletcher, each word clearly tasting like ash in her mouth. I could see her mental calculations, wondering if he'd seek revenge, if he'd sabotage her position, if the past would rise up and destroy this new opportunity. But Marcus remained impeccably professional, treating her with the same courteous respect he showed everyone, never once acknowledging their history in front of colleagues. It was masterful heed, won by becoming unreachable, untouchable by her old weapons. After the meeting, I lingered as others filed out. Diane approached me with a desperate friendliness I found revolting. Do I know you from somewhere? She asked, her eyes scanning my face for recognition. I smiled coldly and replied, I used to live on Maple Street. I remember everything. Her face went white as paper, and she left the conference room quickly, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. Marcus touched my shoulder gently as he passed. Thank you for being a witness, he said softly. Then and now, the weeks that followed were fascinating to observe, like watching a complex dance where all the steps had been reversed. Diane tried desperately to be invisible, to avoid direct interaction with Marcus, but her role required constant collaboration with his department. Every meeting, every email, every project update forced her to acknowledge his authority, to defer to his expertise, to say yes, sir, and of course, Mr. Fletcher, while the past hung between them like a ghost only they could see. Though I could see it too, clear as daylight. I watched her struggle with the cognitive dissonance. This couldn't be the same man she'd mocked for fixing toilets and changing light bulbs, but it was, and the evidence surrounded her daily. Marcus's office filled with awards, his calendar packed with high-level meetings, executives seeking his counsel on million-dollar decisions. She'd have to pass his office each morning, see his name on memos, hear others speak of him with admiration and respect. The humiliation was exquisite, precisely because it wasn't deliberate. It was simply reality, reflecting back everything she'd refused to see. During a presentation to the board, I sat beside Marcus as Diane delivered compliance findings on our renovation project. Her hands shook slightly as she clicked through slides, her voice losing its usual sharp confidence whenever she had to reference Marcus's decisions or acknowledge his departmental oversight. As Mr. Fletcher's team has correctly identified, she'd say, or following Mr. Fletcher's recommendations, each attribution a tiny surrender. The board members praised Marcus's foresight and leadership, completely unaware of the private reckoning happening in that mahogany-paneled room. But I was aware, God, I was aware. One afternoon, I found Diane in the break room, staring blankly at the coffee maker, her professional mask finally slipping. She looked older, tired, the weight of karma heavy on her shoulders. "He's not going to forgive me, is he?" she asked, without looking at me, her voice hollow and defeated. I poured my coffee slowly, considering my words carefully. Forgiveness isn't the point anymore. He doesn't need it because he doesn't need anything from you. You're just irrelevant to his story now. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, because the truth hurts more than any revenge ever could. Marcus never gloated, never referenced their past, never used his position to make her life difficult. That was perhaps the most devastating part. He didn't need to. His success was its own statement, louder than any words could be. He treated her with the same professional courtesy he offered everyone, which somehow made it worse for her. She wanted anger, wanted acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, wanted something she could fight against or apologize for. Instead, she got polite indifference, which is the ultimate dismissal. The final proof that her opinion of him had never mattered at all. I had lunch with Marcus one Thursday, sitting in a small Italian restaurant near the office, the kind with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh basil hanging in the air. "Do you ever feel angry?" I asked him directly, twirling pasta on my fork. He thought for a long moment, watching people pass by the window. "I used to. I was furious for years at her, at myself for staying, at everyone who watched and said nothing. But anger is exhausting. Eventually, I realized the best revenge wasn't hurting her back. It was becoming someone she couldn't hurt anymore." His wisdom settled over me like a warm blanket on a cold night. 2 months into Diane's tenure, the renovation project hit a critical phase, requiring intensive collaboration between departments. Marcus assigned me to lead the facilities coordination team, which meant working directly with Diane's compliance unit. Our meetings were awkward at first. Diane, clearly uncomfortable with my presence, was the witness to her past cruelty, the reminder of who she'd been on Maple Street when neighbors were props in her theater of dominance. But I maintained strict professionalism, focused solely on the work, refusing to engage with the personal drama simmering beneath every interaction. During one particularly tense meeting about environmental regulations, Diane challenged one of Marcus's infrastructure decisions, her old sharpness momentarily returning. "With all due respect, sir, I'm not sure this approach meets federal guidelines," she said, her tone carefully controlled but edged with the ghost of her old condescension. The room went quiet, everyone sensing something beneath the surface. Marcus calmly pulled up documentation, walked through his reasoning with patient expertise, demonstrating not just compliance but innovation that exceeded requirements. Diane had no choice but to concede, to nod, to say, "You're absolutely right, Mr. Fletcher, another small defeat in a war already lost." I watched her leave that meeting, saw her pause in the hallway outside, her hand pressed against the wall as if needing support. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her almost. Then I remembered Marcus leaning against that oak tree a decade ago, his shoulders shaking with silent tears, and my sympathy evaporated like morning dew. Some people spend their whole lives learning that other people aren't supporting characters in their personal narrative. Diane was learning it late, and the education was expensive, paid in daily doses of humility she'd never had to swallow before. The office gossip mill eventually picked up on the tension, though no one knew the real story. People speculated about past professional conflicts, personality clashes, the usual office politics that fuel break-room conversations. Marcus and I never confirmed or denied anything, letting their speculation drift around us like smoke. Sarah from accounting asked me once if there was history between Marcus and Diane, and I smiled enigmatically and said, "Everyone has history. What matters is what you build after it. She seemed satisfied with that known answer, and the rumors eventually faded into background noise. Marcus was offered a position at a Fortune 500 company in Boston. More money, more prestige, the kind of opportunity people spend careers chasing. He came to my office to tell me, closing the door behind him and sitting heavily in the chair across from my desk. "I'm not taking it," he said, and I asked him why. "Because I like who I am here. I like the team I've built, the work we're doing, and maybe I need to see this through, to prove to myself that I can exist in the same space as my past, without running from it. I understood completely some victories require you to stand your ground." Diane learned about the offer he'd declined office gossip again. Impossible to contain, and I saw something shift in her expression when Marcus's name came up in meetings after that. Not respect exactly, but something like recognition. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't about her anymore, had never really been about her after Maple Street. This was about Marcus reclaiming himself, and her presence was incidental, a footnote in his larger story of transformation. That realization seemed to settle something in her. Though whether it brought peace or deeper regret, I couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. 6 months after Diane's arrival, the renovation project reached completion under budget. Ahead of schedule, a triumph that earned our department's company-wide recognition. At the celebration reception in the building's newly renovated atrium, Marcus gave a speech thanking his team, his words genuine and warm, his presence commanding the room with easy authority. Diane stood at the back, clapping with everyone else, her face a careful mask of professional pleasantness. I wondered what was going through her mind as she watched this man she'd once diminished, now receiving accolades from executives, his name synonymous with excellence and innovation. After the speeches, after the champagne and congratulations, I found myself standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the lights of Hartford spreading out like scattered stars. Diane approached slowly, her steps hesitant, her champagne glass held like a shield. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual corporate polish. I nodded, waiting. Does Marcus ever talk about me, about what I did? I looked at her directly, seeing past the expensive suit to the insecurity beneath. "No," I said truthfully, "you don't come up. You're not part of his story anymore." Something crumpled in her expression then, a kind of grief I hadn't expected. "I was terrible to him," she whispered, the words seeming to cost her everything. "I know that now. I see it every day in this building. I see what he became, what he always could have been if I hadn't." She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. I felt no satisfaction in her pain, but I also felt no obligation to comfort her. "What you did can't be undone," I said simply. "All you can do is be different going forward. Not for him, for yourself." She nodded slowly, tears threatening at the corners of her carefully made-up eyes. Marcus joined us then, his presence immediately changing the dynamic. Diane straightened, that professional mask snapping back into place, but her eyes remained vulnerable. "Congratulations on the project, sir," she said formally. "Your leadership was exemplary." He looked at her for a long moment, and I saw something pass between them, not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps a mutual acknowledgement of the road traveled, the people they'd both been and the people they'd become. "Thank you, Miss Morrison," he replied evenly. "Your team's compliance work was crucial. I appreciate your professionalism." It was a small gift, that acknowledgement more than she deserved, but perhaps exactly what was needed. Diane excused herself shortly after, and Marcus and I stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker and glow. "Do you think people can really change?" he asked me, his voice thoughtful. I considered the question, thought about my own journey from broken divorcee to successful executive, about his transformation from defeated husband to respected leader. "I think people can grow," I replied carefully. "Whether that's the same as change, I don't know. But I think we can become bigger than our worst moments if we're willing to do the work." He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah, I think you're right." The following week, Diane requested a transfer to the company's New York office. The request was approved. Quickly, her work had been competent, if not exceptional, and the New York team needed compliance expertise. I heard through Sharon that Diane had specifically requested not to work in operations at departments, choosing instead a role that would minimize contact with facilities management. It felt like a retreat, a final acknowledgement that she couldn't inhabit the same professional space as the man she'd once destroyed, now rebuilt beyond her ability to affect him. Her last day was quiet, without fanfare, her office emptied of personal items as if she'd never been there at all. Marcus and I never discussed her departure explicitly. Instead, we focused on the work on building something positive and lasting in this space. We'd both claimed for ourselves, sometimes, late in the afternoon when the office had quieted and the sun slanted through the windows at angles that turned everything golden. We'd talk about Maple Street, about the people we'd been then, about how far we'd come. Those conversations felt like closing doors gently on rooms we no longer needed to revisit. Acknowledgments of the past without being trapped by it. Finding peace in the distance traveled rather than the pain endured. A year after Diane left, Marcus was promoted to Senior Vice President, his office moving to the executive floor with views that stretched all the way to the Long Island Sound on clear days. I was promoted to becoming his second in command. Our partnership built on mutual respect and shared history that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with recognizing each other's humanity when the world seemed determined to deny it. We built a department culture based on respect, on seeing people's potential rather than their limitations, on understanding that everyone has a story and deserves dignity in their professional life. I heard through old neighborhood connections that Diane had married again. A quick courtship with someone in finance, another prestigious match. I wondered if she'd learned anything if she treated this new partner differently. If the lessons of Marcus and Maple Street had sunk deep enough to change her fundamental patterns. I hoped so, for her sake more than anyone else's, because living with the knowledge of the damage you've caused is its own special kind of punishment. But it wasn't my story to follow anymore. Had my own life, my own work, my own daily victories to celebrate. Marcus started a mentorship program at Riverside, specifically focused on supporting staff members in maintenance, custodial, and facilities roles who wanted to advance their education or careers. He personally funded several scholarships, worked with local community colleges to create pathways for working adults, showed up at every graduation ceremony to shake hands and offer congratulations. Nobody should feel trapped by other people's low expectations, he told me once, reviewing applications for the program. Nobody should have to believe they're less than they are just because someone with power says so. His work touched hundreds of lives, ripples spreading outward from his quiet determination to transform pain into purpose. One evening, working late on quarterly reports, I looked up to find Marcus standing in my doorway with 2 cups of coffee, that familiar gesture that had become ritual between us. We took a break, sitting in my office with its view of the river, watching lights reflect off the dark water like liquid gold. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had been different?" he asked. If she'd been kind, if the divorce had never happened. I considered it seriously, knowing he deserved a thoughtful answer. Then you might still be on Maple Street, still safe, still comfortable. But you wouldn't be this. I gestured at everything he'd become. Sometimes the breaking is necessary for the building. He nodded slowly, absorbing that truth we'd both lived. I wouldn't change it, he said finally. Not the pain, not the humiliation, not any of it. Because all of that taught me who I actually am. Not who I thought I had to be. It taught me that other people's judgments are just opinions, not verdicts. We sat in comfortable silence after that. 2 people who'd walked through fire in different ways but understood the landscape on the other side. The hard-won peace that comes from surviving what should have destroyed you and emerging not just intact but transformed, strengthened, refined by the heat. The last time I thought about Diane Morrison with any real emotional weight was when Marcus's mentorship program won a national award for innovative corporate social responsibility. The ceremony was in Chicago, black tie and champagne. Executives from across the country celebrating excellence in leadership. Marcus gave his acceptance speech with the same calm authority that now came naturally to him, crediting his team, talking about the power of seeing potential in unexpected places. I sat at our company table, proud and moved, thinking about the man on Maple Street who couldn't even finish a sentence without his wife cutting him down, and marveling at the distance traveled. Later that night, at the hotel bar with colleagues celebrating the award, someone asked Marcus what inspired the program. He looked at me briefly, a silent communication passing between us, then smiled at the questioner. "I was inspired by people who saw me when I was invisible," he said simply. "I want to make sure others get that same gift, being truly seen, being recognized for who they could become rather than judged for where they currently stand." The table raised their glasses in a toast, and I raised mine to 2 second chances and hard-won victories. To the quiet revolution of becoming yourself despite everything that tries to tell you who you should be. 5 years have passed since that day I walked into Riverside and found Marcus transformed. We're both different, no older, grayer, marked by time and experience in ways that show in laugh lines and reading glasses. The company has grown. Our department has expanded. The work continues with its challenges and triumphs. I've heard nothing about Diane in years. She's become a ghost from another life, relevant only as a cautionary tale about the cost of cruelty and the unpredictability of karma. I don't wish her ill, but I don't think of her much at all anymore. which is perhaps the truest form of moving on. Marcus and I have coffee every Friday morning, a ritual that anchors our weeks. We talk about work, about life, about aging parents and changing times, about the kids in his mentorship program and their victories both large and small. Sometimes we talk about Maple Street, laughing now about the neighborhood characters and summer barbecues, the memories softened by distance until even the painful ones have become simply part of the story. Neither good nor bad, but simply what was, what led to what is. Those conversations feel like tending a garden, pulling weeds of bitterness, watering seeds of gratitude. Last month, driving through Connecticut to visit a project site, we passed the exit for our old neighborhood. On impulse, Marcus took it, and we drove slowly down Maple Street in his sleek silver sedan, so different from the beat-up pickup he used to drive. The street looked smaller somehow, the way childhood places always do when you return as an adult. The blue Colonial had new owners, children's toys scattered across the lawn, a cheerful chaos that felt healing somehow. We didn't stop, didn't linger, just drove through slowly and then back to the highway. Back to our lives, the visit complete and somehow necessary. "Do you think she ever drives past and wonders?" Marcus asked as we merged back onto I-91, the city rising before us in the distance. I thought about it, about Diane maybe cruising slowly past that house, remembering the woman she'd been, the man she'd failed to see. "Maybe," I replied, "but it doesn't matter anymore. Her wondering or not wondering doesn't change anything about your life now. You're free of all that." He smiled at that word, free, nodding slowly as the miles passed beneath us, the past receding in the rearview mirror where it belonged, informative but no longer defining, a chapter closed but not forgotten. I've learned something profound from watching Marcus's journey. Something I try to carry into my own life and share with the young professionals I mentor. Dignity cannot be permanently stolen, it can only be temporarily misplaced. Marcus didn't get his dignity back when Diane called him sir in that conference room. He'd already reclaimed it through years of hard work, education, self-reflection, and the daily choice to see himself truly, rather than through the distorted mirror of someone else's cruelty. The moment in that conference room was just the universe confirming what he already knew. He was worthy, capable, deserving of respect. That's the lesson worth sharing, the story worth telling. The sun is setting over Hartford now as I write this, the office mostly empty except for the dedicated few of us who stay late because we love the work. Marcus just stopped by with coffee still black with one sugar after all these years, and we talked about tomorrow's presentation to the board, about the new initiative we're launching, about ordinary things that feel extraordinary because we're doing them as our authentic selves. Before he left, he paused at my door and said, "Thank you for seeing me back then on Maple Street. It mattered more than you know." I smiled and replied, "Thank you for letting me witness who you'd become. That mattered more than you know." This is how justice arrives, not with thunder and lightning, not with dramatic confrontations or calculated revenge. It arrives quietly, in the steady accumulation of choices to be better, to grow, to refuse the limitations others try to impose. It arrives in corner offices earned through merit, in sir spoken by lips that once dripped with contempt, in the simple, profound victory of becoming so fully yourself that the opinions of your past tormentors become irrelevant noise. Marcus taught me that, and I'm grateful for the lesson every single day. Grateful for the privilege of watching transformation happen in real time, close enough to see its details. Sometimes late at night when the city sleeps and I'm alone with my thoughts, I think about all the people trapped in relationships like Marcus's old marriage, being diminished, being told they're less than they are, slowly forgetting their own worth. I think about them and I want to say, you are not what they tell you. You are what you choose to become. The road is hard, the journey is long, but on the other side of that pain is a life where you stand tall, where you speak with confidence, where you know your value independent of anyone else's valuation. It's worth it, that journey. Marcus is living proof. I am too. And someday, maybe someone will read these words and decide to start their own journey, to take that first terrifying step toward becoming themselves. That would be the best ending of all.